Good evening, everybody. I'm Ms. Vatamari Borare, moderator for this evening. Welcomes you on behalf on the welcomes you behalf of Shahananka Kachi Engineering College, Mumbai, India. We at SAKEC Research Cell would take this opportunity to thank each one of you present here today for this hybrid webinar series, Innovative and Emerging Technology in the Field of Research, which is hosted in collaboration with 25 plus national and international partners. I would especially like to make mention of our international collaborator, University of North America, to make this webinar happen. With great pleasure, I would like to introduce to you our speaker for this evening. First speaker is Mr. Sree Roy. Mr. Sree Roy is currently a lead volunteer in Apple training at the DC Public Library Express in adaptive technology and serves as a board member on the American Council of Blind Virginia. He also volunteers and provides Apple training for individuals who have low vision or those are completely blind in the District of Columbia, Virginia, and Maryland. He has over 25 years of IT experience and was senior systems engineer at US Inspect, Infonic, and Simplicity. In 2009, he was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which generically impacted his older brother as well as sister. In 2018, he started volunteering at the DC Public Library as an IT trainer focusing on Apple devices and built in the iOS and Mac voiceover training curriculums. He was a guest speaker at the retirement community in Fairfax, Virginia, and has talked on low vision topics and at the POB town hall meetings. He currently is a member of Reston VIP FFB Virginia and a board member at ACB Virginia. He earned his bachelor's in the International Business Studies at Marymount University with honors. Our next speaker for the evening is Mr. Ross Taylor. Mr. Taylor has been a librarian since 1994, working as a law librarian at Lohnes in Washington, D.C. for 15 years before getting his library degree at Catholic University, where he graduated in 2016. He automated the law firm library and helped it adapt to the internet. He has since worked with the Library of Congress and OPEC, as well as special other libraries such as the Jung Society of Washington and the Adaptive Technology Division of DC Public Library. He has taught English composition and literature at several universities. He has published poetries, fictions, and interviews in over 30 literary magazines. He was webmaster for Washington Review of the Arts. With the expertise these two hold, I am sure we all will be waiting to hear from them. Before handing over to our speakers, I would like to make an announcement to all my attendees that if you have any queries or questions that you want to ask to our speakers throughout the session, you can put it via the Q&A chat box. The frequently asked questions will be answered towards the end of the webinar. Now handing over to you also. Mr. Ross, your microphone is on mute, sir.
Good evening. This is Ross Taylor. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you see me?
Yes.
And Sree and I are going to talk about assistive technology for blind and low vision users. It's really a big subject. There's a lot of software out there. This will just be an overview. It's approached a bunch of different ways. We won't be really getting into a lot of how you do things. It will be just the basic kinds of things that are done. The softwares have many special commands of their own, vast numbers of special commands of their own. And I'll go on and share my screen. So, Sree, do you want to say any? And one thing I might say about myself is that my first experience with this really was, though I had a friend who lost his vision earlier and wrote about it. He was a poet, and he wrote about it. He was able to explain a lot of things very well. He's got a book called Planet of the Blind, where he's a poet, so he gets funny sometimes, but he does explain a lot of things about the experience. And then I worked at the Library of Congress, National Library Services for the Blind Physically Handicapped. And what I was doing there was promoting a piece of hardware that was to help our American money be usable by blind people. And it's typical of the sorts of practical problems and challenges that get involved in this. American money.
Sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
but can you please share your screen one more time?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, now it's perfect, sir.
Okay. And is that okay?
Yes, sir, that's fine.
Great. All right. At any rate, what we were promoting was something called the iBill currency reader. And it was a little device about the size of a pen or a thumb drive, if you all remember thumb drives, that you could stick a corner of an American dollar bill in, and it would read the dollar bill in a recorded voice, just 1 or 5 or 20. But American money is all the same size and shape, and so it's not accessible, American paper money. So that's one example of the many different kinds of tech that this promotes. Sree, did you want to say anything about yourself and make sure you can be heard?
No, I think they summarized my background pretty well. I think I'm good there. Nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay. Well, just quickly, number of visually impaired, 285 million people worldwide, 39 million blind, 246 low vision. We'll be talking about both blindness and low vision. We'll define that in a moment. So I'll go on to the blindness and low vision defined. And
Ross, hey Ross, I apologize. If you can just kind of let me know what slide you're on, since I can't see the screen for myself.
Yes, this is slide 3.
Okay, that's me.
Yes.
So I'm going to kind of define what blindness is. There's 2 types of definition we have. We have what's legally blind and those who have low vision. You are defined as being legally blind if your vision acuity is between 20/200 or less. And like for myself, I lost my vision, like it was stated in 2009, where I only had about less than 9 degrees of vision. And what that would mean is if you're looking at a straw, looking through a straw, I would only see what was seen through the straw, and everything else around it was blurry or just a blob. And so that is where retinitis pigmentosa affects is your peripheral vision, and eventually you start losing your vision through the peripherals, and then eventually your center vision. Now,
Mr. Ross, I am sorry to interrupt again. Sir, you have shared the screen, but the slides are not been moving on the display. So can you just stop sharing it and share it again, please?
Okay.
Yes, now we can see how many people are visually impaired.
Okay.
So we're in slide 3 now.
Yes.
We still, yeah, now this it's the next slide. Blindness and low vision defined.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And so, like I was explaining, for me, even though you know, I really have no vision left, I do see some light, but the light is just doesn't define the object. It's just that I see some brightness, but I can't make out anything that's the light projects. So you know, sometimes the light itself doesn't give us any good image for those who are blind. Now, what is defined as uh, a low vision is when you go to your doctor and they provide you with glasses or contacts, and that itself does not correct your vision. When that happens, you are considered to have low vision.
And
Now we'll go to slide 4.
yes.
So in the United States, there's been laws that have been passed throughout the years to help those who are visually impaired. The 1931 Pratt-Smoot Act, it set up the National Library, and what that law helped us is for people like Ross and myself to be able to go to the library, or individuals who need to go to the library to have accessibility devices. So that was a big law that was passed that started this whole program for the blind community. In the 1937, we had the Shepherd Act, and what that really meant was on any federal building, blind individuals, those who are blind, are given the first opportunity to start a business. So you'll find that in a lot of federal buildings here that the gift shop or the little coffee shops are owned by a blind individual, and that's what that law allowed it to be put in place on any federal building. Now, the 1938, we had the Wagner-O'Day Act, and what that really, the law came into place was for that an organization must buy their products, a federal agency must buy their products from a nonprofit organization that is hired by blind workers. And so that just means that if a federal agency needs to buy some products, they have to first go to a nonprofit organization that is employed by blind individuals to buy their products, and that's what that act came into place for. And obviously, we have the Rehabilitation Act, and that started the Section 508. And what that entailed is that any document that's digital or a website must be accessible through the blind community through a screen reader. You cannot create a website if a blind person cannot access it. So that's what Section 508 came into place. There's always been lots of issues, even now in the United States, that some sites or documents are still not accessible through the Section 508 law. In the 1990, we have the American Disability Act that just basically sums it into that that everybody should be treated equal. It's supposed to prevent any kind of discrimination between the disability community or to the general community. And then 2008, we had an amendment to the act that just basically updated the existing act. And Ross, I think the next slide is yours.
Yes, it is. And on to slide 5. This is just briefly mentioning international acts. There's information at the United Nations Enable website, the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, International Resources website. This presentation is recorded, so I can provide these slides and these URLs. I'm simply putting them up for your information. Some key terms: visually impaired, BVI. Sometimes you'll hear very terms like that. Assistive technology, that is pretty much anything that's helping with physical challenges, also called adaptive technology. And human beings are extremely adaptive. One of the things is that if you can't navigate a website visually or a lot of tasks, we have amazing memories, human beings do. And you can learn to rock your memory. But organization helps that. They're not the external cues. A lot of websites and applications depend on external cues, and so simple logical organization is a great virtue in accessible technology. Color contrast, that's the ratio between text and background color. There are websites that can help determine that. Screen reader, that's what reads the text or descriptions of visual objects on website or computer screen. That's a lot of what we're talking about here. The kinds of technology are speech recognition software, which is you speak into it, it turns that into text or understands your speech. Screen reader software is going to some text-based presentation or computer program that and reading that, and if there are images, it's reading the descriptions of the images or verbal descriptions of or sounds that indicate a text box. They're verbal descriptions and sounds that indicate everything on the screen if something has been created accessibly. And then there's screen magnification software, which, as it says, magnifies the screen. So examples of screen readers, just some sort of brand names. Windows Narrator, it's relatively new. JAWS, J-W-S, from Freedom Scientific, has been the standard for Windows software for some time. It has competition from Narrator now. It's also been upgraded to something called Fusion that includes screen magnification. One of the things about Windows and accessibility is the Randolph-Shepard Act, as Sree said, that because of the job opportunities for people in the government, there's a focus on that. At the same time, the U.S. government tends to, since the 90s, has tended to work with Windows. It's beginning to change some now, but the U.S. government has tended to work with Microsoft in their offices. And a lot of governments all over the state governments all over the U.S. do this too. That's JAWS is something that I focused on because of that. Sree knows Apple and other applications better than I do. Another screen reader is NVDA, which many people say is better than JAWS, but it's open source and it's for Windows. And so the government in some places have resistance to open source programs, but it's free. JAWS can be expensive, but JAWS does run. You can download it and it will run for 40 minutes at a time. Then you have to restart your computer. That is one issue why I'm not doing a demonstration of JAWS now, because there are issues of it taking over your computer and then running out of steam after 40 minutes, and you have to restart the computer to restart JAWS. Other screen readers are Google Talkback, Apple VoiceOver, and Amazon Voice View. I'm going on to slide 9. Magnifiers enlarge the screen. There can be something that will, a box that you can move around the screen that will just enlarge portions of the screen like a magnifying glass. It can enlarge the whole screen, and the mouse moves you around the screen. So you'll be looking at one corner of the screen, and you have to know your way around whatever screen this is well, because you won't be seeing the other 3/4 of it, or something like that, depending on how much magnification you have. Magnifiers frequently, like zoom text, will have other properties. They can change color, they can change contrast. This is important for people who have color blindness or who need contrast. So it attempts to adapt to a lot of different kinds of situations. So Windows Magnifier, just regularly available in Windows, does enlarges the screen. Zoom text does a lot of other things, including it can change the color of the pointer, change the size of the pointer, and then Apple Magnifier or Zoom. And I'm moving on to slide 10 and turning it over to you, Sree, if that's okay.
Okay, great. So, Ross mentioned about a lot of different companies out there that are providing accessibility services. I'm going to talk about the hardware and the software that these companies are providing. Like Ross said, my focus is mostly on Apple, but there is no one one right company to go with. It's based on individuals. Ross and I have worked with people that use JAWS. Some have used Narrator. Some have used Apple. So there is no right answer, and it's based on individual preference. So we'll go over some of the hardware and software. So now I'm going to talk about embedded screen readers. Embedded screen readers are screen readers that are built with the operating systems. And at times it can make a difference for not only the developers, but also for the end users like myself. So the first company that does the embedded screen reader is Apple. And obviously Apple, if you guys, I'm pretty sure in India, it's just as big as it is there as it is here. They have the iPhone, the iPad, the iPod, HomePod, the MacBook Airs, and the MacBook Pros, iMac, Apple Watch, and Apple TV. in their software applications, obviously they have the iOS, the iPad OS, Mac OS, Watch OS, Apple TV OS. And the important thing about what Apple has done well is in all these devices and all these operating systems, they have an embedded voice screen reader called VoiceOver. And they make sure that all those products with accessibility works together. And that's a very difficult thing to do because you have to make sure that all of these products, from a VoiceOver perspective, follows the same guidelines and rules. And Apple has done that pretty well with all their products. Now, you also have Microsoft. Now, Microsoft is basically a software company with their Windows 10, but they do make the Surface tablet laptops. But obviously, Microsoft, like Ross said, is what the government predominantly uses. They use their Windows shop, and there are a Freedom Scientific JAWS shop, because in the get-go, Microsoft kind of didn't focus on the accessibility of their screen readers. They've kind of tried it, then they outsourced it, and then they went back to it, and now are definitely understanding the importance of building this screen reader. And I think with the latest Windows 10 that they updated, and you can definitely tell that Microsoft is a player now in the accessibility field. And if you do a lot of research on Microsoft, you'll see that their accessibility is being part of their annual revenue that they put in back is in accessibility now. Now, and in Microsoft, their operating system is the Windows 10, and their screen reader is called the Narrator, and that is also built in. So both Microsoft and Apple have now got into the embedded screen reading. So it's actually really good because, as you know, software gets updated, and when software gets updated, it's beneficial for the company that builds the software that they're also making sure those accessibility softwares are also being updated. Because some of the problems that we can encounter in the blind community is, like, for example, we've noticed that Windows 10 did an update, and then maybe your overlay screen readers, which I'm going to talk about next, may not also have updated. So that has some conflicts, and then you also have to make sure that it works with everything else that the Windows is running. So now I'm going to talk about overlay screen readers, and overlay screen readers is not embedded. That means that these screen readers actually lay on top of the operating system. Now, Ross mentioned about JAWS. JAWS has been around, and maybe Ross can correct me, but it's been around for a long time. They were the first big player in the market of screen reading. It was started with Freedom Scientific. That's probably why the government stuck with it, because it's been around the longest. And JAWS, like Ross was explaining, it does cost, it's an annual subscription. It used to be like $900 to buy the software. I think it's somewhere around, it used to be around $900 to buy the software. And then I think they gave you an update for 2 years. Then you have to buy the software again. Obviously, for the blind community, that's a very expensive purchase, but now they've gone into a subscription plan that it's $90 a year. And just to let you know that Apple's VoiceOver and Microsoft's Narrator, they're both free. They're built in. There's no additional cost to have those applications. The next one is NVDA that Ross also mentioned. That is it was started by a nonprofit organization, and it is an open source, so a lot of companies are a little bit against it. But if you don't want to spend the money to buy a screen reader, NVDA is a good substitution for JAWS or Windows. Now, obviously the narrator, JAWS, and NVDA only works on Windows. They are not supported by Apple. Okay, then we have the next company is Google. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that one. Then obviously you have a Google phone, Chromebook. They have the Home app, and they run on Android. This is also it's a built-in screen reader. So obviously it is part of when you buy a Google Android device, you do have the TalkBack on your devices. So, and it's pretty comparable to Apple, and it's really a preference. There's no right or wrong device. You know, some people like Apple, some people like Google. So it's from an accessibility, it's what do you feel comfortable with the device? The one thing that I do like about Apple is they're, like I mentioned, all those devices, they all work together. Now Google, you know, outsources their product to a lot of other companies too, so they have to make sure that they're in par with whatever Google's doing. But both are really solid products for the blind community. You also have Samsung. Samsung makes a lot of products also. You know, they make laptops. Obviously, they have their very popular Galaxy phones. They make tablets. They also make watches. And they also run mostly on Android operating system on their devices. And they have their own screen reader called voice assistants. Now, it depends on the product. Some run on TalkBack, some run on their voice services. The other company I want to talk about is Amazon. It's getting very popular in the blind community here because of their devices that they have that are relatively simple to set up. It's fully accessible for the blind community. You'll hear that a lot of blind communities in the US have the Amazon devices for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're relatively inexpensive. And I mentioned as before, they're relatively simple to set up for the blind community, and it's fully accessible. They have the Dot. They have lots of other devices. I don't want to say it because much of stuff in my house will go off, so I'll just not mention a lot of them because then we'll be hearing my Amazon devices going off left and right. They also have Fire TV, which is getting really popular now, and it's also fully accessible on their menus. And I see a lot of blind community use this because number one, it's very inexpensive, and a lot of other companies are getting in tune with Amazon to set up their apps on the Fire TV. And their screen reader is called Voice View, and it is also relatively well done, and it is pretty well accessible for the blind community using those devices. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is the accessibility testing. Now, this is really important to me because once I started getting involved in the blind community, I've noticed that when developers build their coding, or they're trying to build something with the code, that a lot of times the blind community is not part of that development process. And what happens is when that occurs, when you build a product and then you try to put it out to the blind community, sometimes they don't work because as they were writing their code, they didn't think about all the things that they needed to put in place. And Ross went over a lot of those things prior. And so it's really important that you guys, as if you're developers, include the community, because if you do it and then you bring the blind community in, then you basically, number one, you have to go back, and number two, you've basically left the blind community out. And that's something that I've noticed, as I stated before, that when I was involved with the organizations throughout the different groups in the DC area, I've noticed this. We are the last people, even simple things like the crosswalks that they're putting in place, and it's really all visual. And now we are going there to these crosswalks to put audible alerts for the blind community. And that's why it's so important, when you're doing these things, you take this community into account as you build the products. All right, I'm going to talk about the next slide is the testing tools. Okay, there are different types of testing. There's automated testing, there are manual testing, and there's lots of different types of software out there to help you do the testing. You don't have to, build everything from scratch. There are tools there to assist you. Some of the tools that people use for testing are AX, that's spelled AX. That's a very useful tool. It's part of the, you can get it through the Chrome extensions. There is SortSite, and what it does is it scans for accessibility on a website, and it can do it through a website or through your or through just a web page, and it can run analytic reports to you to let you know what is passed the muster test for passing accessibility. It can tell you if the font color, the contrast is not correct, or this part of the web page is not accessible. It'll give you a good summary of accessibility that needs to be corrected. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is the color contrast analyzers. You'll find there are some tools out there that will do to make sure that the contrast is really important. Now, as I was losing my sight, I had a little bit of vision left. This contrast was so critical for me because if I looked at a screen on a regular display settings, I could see nothing. It would just be a bright light to me. But when I changed the contrast ratio, I was able to read the screen. So it's really important to make sure that the contrast ratio is set up correctly. Now, for a contrast ratio, there are some website content guidelines rules set up. There's on that on the website content guidelines section 1.4.3, if you look it up, there are some rules that you can apply to contrast on a screen. Now, if basically the guideline says on a body of a text, it should have a 4.1 to a 5 ratio, and it will when you run these analyzers, it'll tell you if that contrast ratio follows that guideline. Now, if you have larger text that are anything between 14 and greater that has a different contrast ratio, it should be somewhere around 3:1 ratio. And running these analyzers will tell you if your website follows those guidelines. Now, there's also contrast ratios that you can set up for those who have low vision, or what we call in the older community, where you can set the contrast ratio to be 7:1, and especially for screen sizes that are, or I'm sorry, for text sizes that are 14 or greater on a web page. So these things are very helpful tools. So you can run these tools on the website, and it'll tell you what those contrast ratios are. Now, Microsoft Office has also accessibility checkers. For example, if you're using Microsoft Word, you can go to the toolbar, go to Tools, and you can check accessibility. And there you can look at the Microsoft document, and it will tell you, does it pass the accessibility test? Does it pass where a blind person could read this document? There's also PDF accessibility checkers. For example, if you're using Acrobat Pro, you can go to the View, then Tools, then Accessibility, and then you can press F6 to bring up the keyboard, and then check the PDF to see if that passes the muster test to be an accessible PDF. Now there's also Foxit Phantom PDF. This tool basically can help you do any tag issues that you're encountering on your website. And so there's a lot of tools out there for you guys when you're building a website or a document to use these tools to help you make sure that when you reach that accessible community, you are passing something that is accessible, and that's very important. And I think Ross has some good sources at the end of the slide to give you more information about these tools that you guys can use. So Ross, I'm going to pass on to you for the next slide.
Okay, yes, slide 14. I'm just going to quickly go through some of the sorts of ideas about creating accessible documents. Document formatting, you need to be very text focused. The file name, is the file protected, and filling out all the document properties. These and alt text for images, the title, and if there are any background images, do they have text associated with them if they're conveying information? Text formatting, again, making sure that the visual layout and the reading order of columns and fields match up. Sometimes this is often people want to have dramatic layouts or use images that are above or below the line of text. This is interesting for a visual thing, but it can mess up the order in which something like JAWS will describe each thing. And again, hyperlink names being descriptive. Objects, things like text boxes, radio buttons, images, linked images. If you don't have text on it, it's not going to be conveying. And graphs and other objects, if they're not created in ways that they automatically are described as in Word, they need to have alt text or captions. Color formatting, again, Sree pretty much covered this one, but it's something to think about. And it's useful to focus on these things also just in terms of design. It really can make you think, is this, are you throwing a lot of extra stuff at a page that's unnecessary? In writing, there's the field of plain language, which tends to focus on language that's direct and descriptive. This is something of a standard for government writing. And it does, in simply utilitarian language, having something that's simple and direct is important. Then on to Slide 19, website testing. We're running a bit short, Sree, but I think we can go over a little bit. So I'm sorry if you can go on with website testing.
I'm sorry, Ross.
Yes, this is website testing.
What slide are we on? I'm sorry, Ross, I lost track.
Slide 19.
Okay, my apologies, sorry. Okay, I'm going to start about this one. I'm going to bring up a Chinese proverb that says the tongue speaks what the eyes can't see. So it's really important that when you build a website that it's very descriptive for someone who's visually impaired. I want if you're going to be a programmer building accessibility, I would recommend that you get familiar with any type of screen readers that we've mentioned above. Try to at least learn one of them. And first thing you should do is, if you're looking at a website, try and just simply navigate using the tab key. Is it following a good normal process that is making logical sense? Because if it's not making logical sense to you, it's most likely not going to make logical sense to a blind person. As you tab, or the focus, is it focus on each object or element on the screen? And what happens if you resize the screen? Do you lose focus, or is it staying in focus? And then I would eventually test it with a screen reader. Test it from start to finish. How well is it navigating? And then make sure when you're screen testing it, make sure you try it with running through the headers or the links or the bullets or the checkbox. Make sure they're all being properly navigating. And then check the high contrast. Is it working well? Is it is fonts? Is one section of the text showing a different contrast to the other areas of the web page? And then finally, I would say go ahead and get other users to test the website. Don't just rely on yourself, but have others help you test it. Get the blind community to test it for you, and make sure things are working well on the site. Okay, Ross.
All right. So again, anything like audio, video in a site needs verbal description and text and MS Word tools such as Word Art are not accessible, and unnecessary spaces and tabs and hard returns. That's typical of the kinds of things that create problems, because if the screen reader is going down reading things paragraph by paragraph, this at least with JAWS, and it hits a hard return, it's going to understand that as the end of a paragraph. But if that's just because you were typing a paragraph and you hit a return reflexively, but kept on typing the paragraph, it's going to stop and miss the rest of the paragraph. And if it's not, depending on how much information it's giving, if it's not reading periods, you might think it's the end of the sentence. This is another detail about screen readers, but they have different levels of what's called verbosity. They can tell different amounts of information about what they're reading. They can read things in sort of normal inflection with pauses for the ends of sentences, or they can read every period, every comma, every parenthesis. Different screen readers will do this differently, but it's typical of the kinds of settings that you have to be aware of. And again, I would, as we're wrapping things up, point out that screen readers and other tools like this, particularly screen readers, particularly JAWS, which I am most familiar with. It's not moving around visually. Jumping around is hard. It tends to be going next, 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 previous, 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 previous. It's one thing after another. There can be commands to jump from one section to another if the sections are labeled and are well organized. You can jump from headers and things like that, and then within a header find something. But there is a sequentialness to a lot of these commands that makes a clear sequence important in how you set up a page. And this is something, again, that's interesting to think about with just thinking about a familiar technology differently. I tend to say it's a bit like the space program, where there are unexpected spin-offs of understanding things in different ways, understanding audio aspects of program of using programs, voice commands. This is for all you engineers that enjoy challenges. This is a bunch of challenges. I have a bunch of screens of resources. These will be available with this presentation. I'm not going to go through them, but there are lots of American government and international sources out there that provide information about this. I think I'll go on and say we'll take questions at this point.
Yes.
I don't know. Okay.
Shwetambari, yes, sir. Before starting the Q&A, I would like to introduce to my attendees Mr. Kiretu Deshi, who is the Director, Regional Development, South Asia, so that even he is along with us for the question and answers. So the first question, sir, we have is, what are assistive technology used for learners with visual impairment?
Ross, you want to answer it, or Sree, you want to answer it?
I apologize. I couldn't hear the question.
Yeah, let me repeat that.
Let me repeat it. What are the assistive technology used for learners with visual impairment? Either one of you who wants to answer this?
So this is about education and people just learning technology. There are lots of different kinds of programs, and some of the people who would be coming into the DC Public Library would not be familiar with computers. And there are things like typeability, which essentially teaches blind, low vision people typing. It teaches the keyboard, the layout, the QWERTY keyboard. It would lots of prompts about where to place your hands. Again, this would be something that you would probably want a teacher to help with, but something that people can practice typing. There are lots of other things like that. That happens to be one that I'm familiar with. Is that seem to be?
Also, Ross, do you want to stop sharing the document?
Yes.
So that way it's easier for you to be available on the screen?
I would say, for me, as I was losing my sight, one of the things that I did early is start learning as much as I can. And, fortunately in the United States, every state has an agency that supports accessibility. There's a lot of institutions in the United States that focus on blind community. I started with the Hadley Institute, start learning the product, just from going to their website. Obviously, both Apple, Microsoft, Freedom Scientific, JAWS, they all have tools also, some really good tools to learn how to use the product. And so as I teach other blind individuals, I teach just from very basic things, just how to navigate. The most important thing to be successful in using these tools is understanding how to navigate, like Ross was explaining about JAWS. As long as you can navigate, because that is how we see the screen, is through navigation.
Another question that's there, is Braille considered assistive technology?
Absolutely, it is, and it is. It is used a lot here. Matter of fact, a lot of these devices work with Braille, with a screen reader. So it is just as important as a screen reader. Matter of fact, you'll find that some people prefer the Braille over the screen reader.
There are Braille keyboards that they're very expensive. They will have a set of pins that they can push up into various formations of the different Braille letters. And so someone can be typing on a Braille keyboard or can have the screen transmitted to the Braille keyboard, so it will spell out what's on the screen in Braille. And I think there are a number of different companies that make those, but and then there are Braille print. There's a lot of the ability to convert text into Braille. Braille is bulky and voiceover and takes up less space. Braille books can be huge. So that's an issue about that. But a lot of older people, and older people are often the ones who are affected, will have known Braille.
And you can't connect like Braille devices to your iPhone. I'm not sure about other devices, but that option is there too. And there are companies, like Ross said, there's one company that makes a Braille keyboard computer. It's just basically it's a Braille keyboard / computer. There's no, you can connect it to a display, but you don't need to, but it's there.
Great. Excellent answers and excellent questions.
Amazing.
One other thing, just want to add from you in a perspective, we do have some hearing impaired students. We have some people with the disabilities, and we do kind of help them out. So it's not just the students who are regular, normal, who has no disabilities or anything. And as I think earlier, one of the speakers did mention that there are a number of laws. I think Sree, you mentioned that number of laws were passed in the United States that they did give additional opportunities for visually impaired people, opportunities to work, opportunities to learn, opportunities to be as normal as they can and enjoy the life. So that is very true. We are the university. We do welcome anyone and everyone, and we try to accommodate as much we can for anybody who needs any additional assistance. So that's all I can tell you. Any other question?
No, I think that's, and I really thank you for your university to do that, because I obviously things have changed. My sister lost her sight in the 80s, and we're in the 80s to compare where we are today, losing your sight. It's totally different. Technology has helped us. There's more awareness, and I'm glad to see that not only that you're supporting the hearing impaired, because that is also a big disability. I live in DC. There's a university that is just fully based on deaf.
Yes.
It's a deaf university. So I'm glad to see that you guys are part of this community, and thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Sree. Any other question?
Yeah, there's one just come in. Is there any concessions in the fee for the differently abled? I mean, it can be blind or deaf, etc.
When you say fee, are you talking about monetary cost? I'm trying to understand.
Yes, I am like in the like if there's a student who wants to enroll into the university, so does the university offer any kind of concessions in the terms of fees, the tuition fees?
Not really, because in real sense, we have to additionally spend additional money to help them get the additional services, additional facilities and all that. So no, there is no discount or anything like that. Some of the domestic students can get some financial assistance from the government, but not from the university itself, no.
And I'll also add to that, it's, these devices are very expensive. And so if some universities do provide these devices to students, so they need to be aware that some of these, like I can give you one example, is a camera with a Bluetooth device to look at objects using, that's connected to your glasses. Those run about $4,000. And in the United States, if there are organizations that if you are a student, they will subsidize some of those things. In the United States, especially the American Council of the Blind gives scholarships specifically for blind students. So depending on what you find in the US, there are opportunities for people who are disabled to get scholarships as well as grants that if you have a disability. So that is something that I would consider. I would let you guys know to go check into that, because there are opportunities for that.
Sure.
I just want to ask one question from my part is, like you mentioned right now that the government gives some grants to the differently abled people, but is it only for the domestic students or it is going to be for international students as well?
From the American Council of Blind, I think the rule is that they have to be a full-time students. I am not sure if it's matter of fact, I know it's not, because the American Council of the Blind gives scholarships to students outside the U.S. also. You just have to apply for it.
Yeah, that was the question. Thank you so much, sir, for giving this information to all the students out here in India and who would like to come and who are differently abled, and also letting them know that there are various technologies available which is going to help them in learning further and not stop it at the stuff because they have some shortcomings. So I would like to thank you all on just showing it out to them. Thank you so much. This is a small token of appreciation from Shahananka Kachi Engineering College to you all. So I would like you all to accept it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is India is the farthest I've ever been away from home.
Thank you, sir.
I'm very glad to participate in this.
But luckily for Sree, as he's from Kerala, this is nice to kind of share his own story as well as the kind of information about the technology that can help the other students. So it's wonderful. And Ross and Sree, thank you very much to be a part of this webinar series and sharing this information and information about the technology. Also that anybody who needs to use it, they can use those technologies. So it's really wonderful to share this information.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Good
Thank you, ma'am.